Let's talk about narrative assets. This is just a catch-all term for any asset that's created to help tell the story of your game. For example, voiceover, custom animations, custom models, custom pop-ups, whatever you need, right? A lot of indie devs avoid creating narrative assets and try and tell their story entirely through, say, text. This is a big missed opportunity because narrative assets are a very powerful tool and they're very affordable. They're more affordable than most devs think.
Okay, sweetie. We're gonna play a fun game now.
The best thing about narrative content is that it has a linear return. Whatever time and skill you put into creating your cutscenes or your voiceovers, that's how invested the player will be. And that's just as true of your 30th cutscene as your first. In game dev, when you're developing the actual core game, it can be very easy to spend hundreds or thousands of hours on something that very few players will ever notice. But a cutscene is something every player will notice. It plays in a specific amount of time and is a specific quality. Moreover, there's no technical debt to worry about because the cutscenes are not dependent on each other.
One might call it a singularity.
Another thing to love about narrative content is that it is almost entirely separate from the core game, as long as you want it to be. Basically, you just need a little HUD element that says, press B to start our cutscene. This detachment means that anything you change in the core game doesn't have to affect the cutscenes, and whatever you do with the cutscenes doesn't have to affect the core game. They're entirely separate projects to some extent.
There you have it, Zach. Patty, Zach and I will take it from here.
They don't even have to use the same rendering pipeline. You can draw pictures and that can be your cutscene. This is enormously freeing. There comes a time when you're doing indie dev, you start to bog down. You put in a couple thousand hours and you realize that you could put in 100 more, 200 more, 300 more hours of work, but it's not going to significantly improve the gameplay. And you start to think to yourself, maybe it's time to polish this and just put it out. But there's a whole second channel. There's the narrative stuff. And your 10,000th hour creating narrative elements is actually more productive than your first hour creating narrative elements because you're more familiar with your needs and your skills have improved. It doesn't have that bogging down sensation that you get when you're making the core game because there's no technical debt. There's very little code and there's no combinatorial stuff happening. It's just cutscenes. You can just go. You can just make more cutscenes.
I did it. I really did it.
That is such a freeing feeling when you suddenly realize that you've gotten bogged down over here on the left making your core game, but over there on the right, you can just go. And it's going to improve your game. So do it. Now, I say there's a linear return, but that's not entirely true. It really does depend on what you're good at and what the player has been led to expect. In this game, we expect somewhat goofy, overwrought content. So we're willing to buy into this overdone crime scene. That's okay for this game and for these devs. On the other hand, if you tried to do this in Resident Evil, people would laugh at you because they expect so much more. They expect gory scenes where the camera zooms in on someone's hand getting cut off, and then worms crawling out everywhere. This sort of static cutscene with some voice acting wouldn't feel very nice. On the other hand, for some indie devs, even this would be a little bit difficult because this requires voice actors that know what they're doing. This is highlighting the voice acting. For example, the Tungulus dev should have done less voice acting. You have to know what you can actually do, and for most game devs, what you can do is create variants of whatever's already in your game. This is something that should be normal. You should just do this offhandedly whenever you need to. Oh, do you need to create a scene where someone is holding an axe but they don't have the right bones to hold an axe or whatever? Just go into Blender, move the mesh around until it's holding an axe, and then export it as a separate mesh. It's pretty easy. Oh, did you need a wall that's been cut apart? Just put it in Blender and cut it apart. This sort of content should be second nature to you as a game dev because these are the things that your game is made of. You should already be familiar and comfortable with them. If you're really struggling to have that sort of basic competence in your game creation skills, this is a good way to get that basic competence. This is a good way to get comfortable. What I'm saying is, create narrative assets. Create cutscenes. Create voiceovers. You could at least try it. It's not going to interfere with the rest of your game, so try it.
I'll be counting on you again tomorrow.
I just helped an FBI agent.